Sup nerds? I was planning my group's next D&D session, and I thought I should record my thought process making it because I'm doing something I've seen a lot of new dungeon masters struggle with. This video is intended for new dungeon masters, but even if you're a player or just curious about how the game works, don't worry, I will be explaining in detail as we go along. I'll be designing a short dungeon for 5th edition D&D, intended to be finished in about 3 hours. It's designed for a group of 5 level 2 players. The party consists of a chaotic evil, minotaur fighter, an ASMR paladin and her ASMR grandma artificer that are looking for their dad/son, who these same players got brutally murdered by a Dracolich last campaign, a tiefling warlock collecting shards of a magic dagger for a lich, and a neutral evil warforged druid that's basically that one episode of Futurama where Bender was made out of wood. A little about me: I've been DMing for 12 years, and I started on version 3.5 of the game. This was a time where D&D was taking a shift in the game's mentality. Older editions of D&D focused on the experience of dungeon crawling, kinda like Tomb Raider, while current editions like to emphasize narrative arcs and character growth like Lord of the Rings. Because of this, my DMing style is a mix of the two, and the dungeon reflects that. The most important thing I believe you should aim for in designing a naturally formed dungeon, though, is realism. Not in the sense of being analogous to real life, but traps have to make sense, the layout has to make sense, and the creatures living in the dungeon have to actually feel like they live there. Last session, my players finished about to set sail down a river, and when they set up camp for the night, a Nothic serving the lich that is our warlock's patron is going to inform the player that a shard of the magic dagger he's trying to put together is in this cave a little down the river. Nothics are a great tool for dungeon masters with warlock players because they have 120-foot true sight, and players can only see out to where their torches reach, or 60 feet if they have dark vision. A Nothic can learn people's secrets just by looking at them, so he goes around collecting information all day from people walking down the road, then camps out, waiting for whoever he wants to talk to be on night watch. Nothics are neutral evil creatures, though, and they will pry into the party's dirty laundry while it sits around waiting. When it talks to the warlock, it'll also try to sow dissent and party conflict by telling the warlock things like how the two ASMR don't trust him, or the Minotaur wants to eat his face. Once it finishes, the player will have to either trick the party or convince them the cave is worth going into the next morning. Alright, here's our dungeon. My group plays in real life, but this is a version I drew up in Roll20, so we have a visual example. Every tile is 5 feet, and the players will be starting in the bottom left of the map at the cave's entrance. Then when they advance to the end, they'll move to the bottom of the middle section, and so on. This is because our cave is a limestone cavern that has been carved out by a stream offshoot from the river our party is sailing down. Flowing water will be at the player's feet for most of the dungeon, and although it's only ankle deep, limestone gets worn away by even slightly acidic water. That's why our cavern follows a sort of meandering line format with the occasional large room. Now, let's meet the big bad guy running this place. An Attercop. This is a classic monster from the United Kingdom. I won't explain the entire lore here, but basically these guys used to be druids that admired the ferocity of vermin's willingness to eat their own young to survive. This circle of druids started grafting spider parts onto themselves and doing profane rituals until eventually they lost their druid powers for being such abominations. Then Beelzebub, Lord of Flies, made a fiendish pact with them, and they became what you see now. A big theme I'm working with this campaign is fiends, and my goal each session is to introduce a different demonic prince or Lord of the Nine Hells through their minions. Attercops might have lost their druid magic, but they still have a deep connection with spiders and retain the high wisdom scores useful for the animal handling skill. They tame spiders and other lowly creatures, then use them to make layers that just expand and expand. Once an Attercop layer gets large enough, it'll start drawing fey creatures like pixies and sprites from the Feywild that just become easy prey. Our Attercop here is special, though. She's pregnant. Fairies can feed her minions, but for her young to get enough sustenance, she'll want at least a few of the players left alive. If the players wipe out in this dungeon, they'll wake up restrained sometime later and have a classic escape the spider lair adventure. Our first room here is going to be a hallway. I think it's really important to tease players and give them some insight into what the dungeon will be like with the first room. That's why our big boss of the dungeon is actually going to be right there at the end of the hall. This hallway is extremely cold, It's narrow with lots of crevices in the walls. It has ankle-deep water running through it. And above that is a layer of hip-height webbing that looks freshly spun. I'll read out a creepy description where she's idly chewing on some poor guy's hand before smiling when she sees the players. Fun fact, Attercaps have human teeth behind the fangs. The guy playing the Minotaur fighter is very headstrong, and I know he's going to do one of two things. He's either going to try and charge in and start combat right away, or he's going to try to set the webs on fire. Both of these things are what the Attercap wants the party to do, though. If the party dies here at the entrance, it would dissuade more visitors from coming. So the traps here are meant to slow and wear down rather than kill. The webbing makes this difficult terrain, which halves movement speed, but more importantly, it obscures which threads are tripwires attached to poison spikes that will swing out from the crevices in the walls. If the players take their time, they can manually trigger each of these from a safe distance using edge weapons. The second trap here is stuffed inside the crevices, brown mold. Attercaps are aware that the big weakness of a spider den is fire, and carefully placed brown mold alleviates that worry. Brown mold expands extremely fast near heat and will snuff out any torches immediately, but more importantly, it'll damage the player by freezing the arm they use to burn the webs. This dissuades adventurers from using fire in the dungeon, but in actuality, this is the only hallway that contains any brown mold. It makes the environment too cold for spiders to live comfortably. No matter what the players do, the Attercap retreats deeper into the dungeon at the end of the first round of combat because they're actually not very good at combat at all. Now this room is going to be the first one where we use minions. Water runs through this room as well, but if the players roll a 10 or higher on a perception skill check, they'll notice there's a section of the ground, marked by the leaves, where the water is unnaturally flowing around a portion of the floor. This is a trapdoor spider's lair. When a player cuts the wrong strand of webbing, it'll pop out, grab them, and pull them into their burrow to isolate them from the rest of the group. Not a terrible challenge to adventurers by itself, but the true threat here is the dark mantle. Dark mantles pretend to be stalactites, and when their eyes are closed, look perfectly like one. They have the ability to make a 15-foot sphere of perfect magical darkness around themselves, then they latch onto a prey's head and try to kill them with their octopus beak. The real trick here is both the dark mantle and the trapdoor spider are trained to attack when the same thread is broken. So players will be immersed in darkness immediately, and while they can't see, one of the players will be scooped up and taken underground as the party struggles against it. This third room here is going to contain loot in order to convince players it's worth going deeper. A body leans against the wall here, let's say a halfling with a glowing short sword. This corpse is different than what you'd expect in a spider dungeon, though. It looks like someone strangled him to death, then a beast ate his innards. This is because what killed him wasn't a spider, but a choker. These little green guys are only a few feet tall and can fit into ultra-thin crevices. When prey walks by, their arms shoot out and they throttle their victims while letting out a shriek. The choker has been warned by the Attercap the players are coming, and if they disturb the body in any way, such as by looting it, the choker will attack whoever's in front. The tight fighting conditions make it difficult to help, but what makes things worse is that this room is full of piercers. Tiny little guys that also pretend to be stalactites. They've been trained to awaken when they hear the choker shriek. They only have one attack, and that's to fall straight down like a sharp thwomp in an all-or-nothing attack. There's only 3, but having a good mixture of regular stalactites and piercers will keep the party too cautious to help their friend. This fourth room is where the stream ends, as it pours straight down into a deep 100-foot hole the players can't see the bottom of, marked in dark gray. This is the dining room for the locals, as dozens of desiccated husks wrapped in thick webbing are suspended here in this gap. All spiders have the ability to walk along webbing without difficulty, so this acts as a bridge to the other side for them. But players will either have to get creative with tools, levitation spells, or playing hopscotch across the non-web bits of leprechauns, nymphs, and previous adventures that are sticking out. 2 threats exist in this room. At the bottom of the pit is a giant spider currently resting. If the web is disturbed in any way, it'll immediately know and come to investigate in 3 turns. The other much larger threat comes from above. the web connects to a cave fisher. This is a type of giant spider that finds high up perches and waits for prey to come by. Our spider is 80 feet up, and when it detects something touches the web, it'll lower itself until it's 60 feet away from the target, which is the limit of its attack range. The cave fisher will shoot out a long, ultra-sticky appendage that attaches to the player and yoinks them rapidly up to it and away from the party before it uses its claws to peel them like a banana. A very dangerous threat, but it has two major weaknesses for you to be aware of. First, the sticky appendage can only pull up to 200 pounds. That means if the paladin went across the chasm first, her bulky armor would be too heavy and the strand will snap under the tension. Second, a cave fisher's blood is actually alcoholic. Dwarves hunt these things in the Underdark for some of the strongest liquor you can find, and because of that, when a cave fisher goes under half health, it actually gains vulnerability to fire damage. So when someone brings it to this point, I plan on describing how their blow draws a streak of blood from the creature, and there's a strong aroma of spirits filling the room. Keen players will pick up on this and ask if the section of the dungeon feels cold, and if they light the beast on fire, it'll be an easy end to the encounter. This last room is the end of the dungeon and where Attercop's home is. Stalagmites were present in the dungeon before, but none of notable size. However, this room is littered with them. Normally, this would be a useful environment for the Attercop, as since this is the only one in our adventure, we're using the special variant that gets a garret. However, when the players walk in, the Attercop is distracted, inspecting the much larger stalagmite that it doesn't remember being in its house. This is a narrative-focused room where the party gets a brief moment of catharsis beating up the weak Attercop before the real threat reveals itself. On the second turn of combat, the large stalagmite that the Attercop didn't recognize will reveal itself to be a roper. A roper is a powerful monster that disguises itself as a stalagmite and is actually the adult version of the piercers we saw before. In a single turn, a roper gets to attack 4 times with its tendrils, which stick to players on contact just like the cave fisher. They pull a single target in, and then he bites them for an incredible amount of damage at this level. Its stony hide gives it a high armor class, and the roper has more HP than everyone in the party put together. Frankly, this is a nearly impossible to win fight this deep in the dungeon. The players will need to either come up with some excellent combat strategy, possibly involving the many stalagmites to keep from getting pulled in, or grab the object they're looking for from the Attercop's den and run. The roper only has a movement speed of 10 feet compared to the average player character's 30, making it very easy to outpace, and the tentacles can be cut to save caught players and make a retreat. As a further bone to throw our party, on the first turn of combat, the roper is going to target the Attercop with one of its tendril attacks and will kill it with its bite if it's caught. And that's the end of our dungeon. I haven't written up the descriptions or loot that the players are going to be getting yet, but that's simple enough to do on your own if you're ripping this. I hope that since you made it to the end, you've learned something, or at least found some cool ideas that you can use and throw into your own games. Thank you very much for watching.